Let me tell the EFF directly today, we will not be deterred from enforcing the rule of law. We will intensify it and we will deport those who violate South African law.
The DA enabled AfriForum to provide services exclusively in white areas, including grass cutting and racially segregated.
Thank you very much, House Chair. I thought it proper for me to respond to the Honourable Tambo from the EFF, because next week he may not be in that party and may have joined the exodus of the rest of the EFF into the Mkhonto weSizwe party.
We have raised this matter with you, that once the ministers start waffling, you must stop them. And you continue people to be incompetent on the floor.
The recent move to grant visa-free access for Ukrainian officials by the DA-led coalition with the ANC government is more than a policy shift. It's a betrayal of South Africa's long-standing principle of non-alignment and solidarity with the oppressed.
A third of the freedom fighters who were trained in the Soviet Union was in Ukraine. And then there's the suggestion that, no, South Africa must pick a side. We must not be non-aligned. It's clear that what comes out of today's member statement is the political illiteracy of the MK party.
Guys, we are slowly seeing the reemergence of the Cold War era kind of competition that actually went on within the continent of Africa, where the forces of the East and the forces of the West seemed to make Africa the clashing ground, and also these other countries like Cuba and the likes. But now we're seeing the reemergence of that again. We saw that in two weeks ago, President Ramaphosa actually made a statement when, South Africa attended the BRICS meeting in Russia, where he spoke about Russia as being a trusted ally and a friend. And then we also have another report with the Home Affairs Minister Leon Schreiber actually asserting that Ukraine, which Russia is actually in what might be seen as a full-out war now, Ukraine is a close ally to South Africa. And so it's really strange that within the government of national unity, we have the president and the minister actually speaking different languages relating to who's an ally of who in what should be a unity government. So it's really strange. And so that's where And so that's one of the problems this video is actually highlighting, that in Parliament there was this clash between the ANC, between the DA and backed by the ANC against the MK and the EFF, who actually blamed the government for trying to dissuade, Russia from its partnership to Russia, while those from the DA wing actually spoke about the fact that the MK and the EFF might not understand their history because most liberation fighters in the ANC at that time were trained in somewhere in also in Ukraine. And so now we also have a really disturbing, this is not disturbing for me personally, but I think it's disturbing for the whole rhetoric of the GNU, that some vessels from Russia actually visited. So it actually spoke about how Russian air arsenal landed in Pretoria, I think about 4 days ago, even as the Ukrainian foreign minister took off. So as the Ukrainian foreign minister finished his meeting with Ronald Lamola about 2 weeks, last week, a week or 2 weeks ago anyway, as soon as that minister took off, and Leon Schreiber announcing to South Africa that Ukraine now has a visa-free program signed with South Africa for the diplomats of both countries to visit their countries visa-free, without visas. We see that the Russian air arsenal, just as the Ukrainian foreign minister took off, a Russian air arsenal landed in South Africa. So we see that South Africa is slowly becoming a battleground for ideologies, and these two systems that are actually waging a war outside the continent being internalized within the continent. And we're really asking, when does this thing stop? When is South Africa going to be neutral in terms of this whole Western-Eastern dichotomy that seems to be framing the modern world? Let's listen to this clash between the ANC, MK, EFF, and the DA in Parliament. And I'll be back for that really interesting analysis on why the Russian air arsenal had to land in Pretoria, just as the foreign minister from Ukraine left South Africa.
Thank you, House Chair. The EFF is outraged by the state of public infrastructure in the city of Tshwane under 8 years of Democratic Alliance governance, which finally ended under Celia's brink. The DA's removal has revealed a neglected city plagued by abandoned buildings, sewage spillage, and rampant illegal dumping, which threatens the lives of Tshwane residents, especially the poor. Under the DA's leadership, Shuberry Park and Kruger Park have deteriorated into drug dens and criminal havens, with no plan to convert them into low-cost housing or student accommodation, both of which are urgently needed in the city. Mamelodi Township became a garbage dump, while Soshanguve and Atteridgeville turned into zones of unresolved murders and violent crime. Amid this decay, the DA administration entered into a racist agreement with AfriForum, granting them access to critical municipal infrastructure without a democratic mandate. The DA enabled AfriForum to provide services exclusively in white areas, including grass cutting and racially segregated security, and empowered them to use force against land occupation protests. The EFF is pleased that this racist alliance has ended and urges the new coalition to repurpose Schubert Park and Kruger Park for housing and immediately revoke any agreements with AfriForum. The racist AfriForum and DA must take their racism away from Tshwane's governance. I thank you, Chair.
The MK.
Honourable Speaker, the recent move to grant visa-free access for Ukrainian officials by the DA-led coalition with the ANC government is more than a policy shift. It's a betrayal of South Africa's long-standing principle of non-alignment and solidarity with the oppressed. As President Jacob Zuma said, South Africa's sovereignty cannot be compromised for the agendas of the West. And yet here we are, with the DA minister not only aligning us with NATO interests, but also flinging open our borders to dual passport holders from Israel, a nation we have taken to the International Court of Justice for violations of international law. The DA's alignment with NATO is glaring. Over 75% of DA representatives have publicly expressed support for Western positions on global conflicts, including in Ukraine, and voted in favor of pro-NATO policies. Meanwhile, the ANC under President Ramaphosa claims allegiance to BRICS, an alliance which together represents over 40% of the global population and is our largest trading partners. Contrast this with the DA leaders' condemnation of BRICS policies, despite the fact that BRICS countries, including Russia, which alone accounts for over $2 billion in annual trade with South Africa. This DA-ANC-led coalition government under the guise of unity is destabilizing South Africa's role in BRICS and betraying our partnerships with nations that stood beside us in our own liberation struggle. MK demands to know if the ANC now stands with the DA's Western-aligned foreign policy or with the BRICS alliance, which supports a peaceful multipolar world. The time has come to prioritize the true interests of our people, uphold our commitments to BRICS, and end this coalition that threatens the South African sovereignty. MK will not stand by as our foreign policy is auctioned off to the highest Western bidder. Waza Mkonto.
Thank you. The next Minister recognized is the Honourable Steenhuisen.
Thank you very much, House Chair. I thought it proper for me to respond to the Honourable Tambo from the EFF, because next week he may not be in that party and may have joined the exodus of the rest of the EFF into the Umkhonto weSizwe party. But let me just say this, that I'm not surprised that the Honourable Tambo and the EFF don't like public-private partnerships. I'm not surprised they don't like communities standing up and doing things for themselves, because their philosophy as a political party is that the big clunking fist of state must do everything for everybody, and unless you rise collectively, none shall rise at all. Communities are joining hands, cleaning their neighborhoods, and
Order, honourable members.
That things work. And the EFF hate it, because they hate to see people doing things for themselves. They hate to see people part of their own.
Honourable Minister, please take your seat for a moment. Honourable Minister. Honourable Mente, why are you rising?
Thank you, House Chair. We have raised this matter with you, that once the ministers start waffling, you must stop them. And you continue people to be incompetent on the floor. Can they answer the matters that are raised pertaining to service delivery that are affecting children and women of this country?
Thank you, Honourable Mente. I have your point of order. The Minister may respond as he wishes. I'm not going to prescribe to him as...
Thank you very much. They hate to see people doing things for themselves, and they would rather see people languishing in terrible neighborhoods with terrible service delivery than us bringing people together to join together. I then want to respond to the member from MK about the Ukraine. And I agree with the Honourable Mantashe. Clearly you're learning your history from the wrong places. Don't believe everything that Ubaba Kaduduzane tells you. The real Umkhonto weSizwe, you would know Joe Medise took them for training in Odessa, which is in the Ukraine. So please go and understand your history before you come here and pretend to be Umkhonto weSizwe when you know nothing about the real Umkhonto weSizwe and its contribution in the country. Thank you.
The next in line is Minister Schreiber.
Thank you very much. Let me add to that very salient point from Minister Steenhuisen that as much as a third of the freedom fighters who were trained in the Soviet Union was in Ukraine. And then there's the suggestion that, no, South Africa must pick a side. We must not be non-aligned. It's clear that what comes out of today's member statements is the political illiteracy of the MK party. Have you ever heard of non-alignment? That is exactly what's happening. I salute our negotiators who have worked on this visa waiver issue, and we will implement the policy of this government. Let me also then say, there's this issue of conflating people who break the law, foreign nationals who come into our country, versus those who want to contribute to this country legally through tourism, through investment, and through skills. Chair, we must know that we are able to chew and walk at the same time. We will differentiate between people who break the law and those who can help us achieve the apex priority of the Government of National Unity, which is to grow the economy and create jobs. That is why we are implementing the measures we're doing at Home Affairs. We are revolutionizing this economy, and no one will deter us. On the other side of this issue, there are some members of this House who have recently suggested that Home Affairs must stop deporting people who violate South Africa's immigration laws. Can you imagine what will happen to this country if we send a signal and say, no, it's fine, you can violate the law as long as it's immigration law, and we'll stop deportations? We will experience a collapse. Let me tell the EFF directly today, we will not be deterred from enforcing the rule of law. We will intensify it, and we will deport those who violate South African law. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, interesting, guys. So we'll just quickly go into this report. I think the Daily Maverick has a really interesting report on it. It says that Russian air arsenal lands in Pretoria as Ukraine's foreign minister takes off. All right. So there's a picture with Ronald Ramola. We know that Ronald Ramola actually had a really interesting meeting. I watched some parts of that meeting with the Ukrainian foreign minister, and they discussed a lot of issues around the whole war and, you know, the multilateralism and all that that's going on in the world. But the report says that SA's GNU partners, they actually had some bickering over the Russian-Ukrainian relations as the Pretoria's foreign policy complexes were full on display. So this complex is actually competitiveness and contradictions of the Government of National Unity's foreign policy. They were on full display this week as Ukraine's foreign minister Andriy Sybiha actually met with his counterpart Ronald Lamola in Pretoria on Monday, and hours later, a Russian air arsenal, you know, as the SA national. So this report goes on to say that South Africa's Government of National Unity partners had bickering over Russia-Ukraine relations, especially as Pretoria's foreign policy complexes became something that you could not ignore. It says that these complexes, there were competitiveness and contradictions of the Government of National Unity. They were on full display this week as Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha met his counterpart Ronald Lamola in Pretoria on Monday. And then hours later, a Russian air arsenal, you know, as the South African National Defense Force delicately put it, began touching down on the capital city's Waterkloof Air Force Base. All right. So in other words, as soon as the foreign minister of Ukraine leaves, hours later, a Russian air arsenal lands in South Africa. And that's a really loud statement, you see. It speaks about how in what looked like a great moment in a bad diplomatic timing, the South African National Defense Force, SANDF, announced on Tuesday on the imminent arrival of two Russian Tu-60 Blackjack strategic bombers with a support flight, including an IL-62 passenger jet and an AN-124 cargo plane, just immediately after Sybiha had taken off. It says that the South African Defense Force said that the Russian air arsenal would visit South Africa from Tuesday to Friday in a display of defense cooperation and strengthening of military-to-military relations, including a seminar between the pilots and the technicians on both on combat planning and search and rescue. All right, so that was the purpose for the visit from the Russian AS arsenal to South Africa. It said one or more of the support planes are believed to have landed at Waterkloof on Tuesday, but it was not clear if and when the Tu-160 strategic bombers would arrive. According to Daily Maverick, it argues that Daily Maverick heard that Moscow may have postponed or even cancelled the visit of the Tu-160 strategic bombers, because probably that would have actually, made a really much more vociferous statement in this whole debacle around the Russia-Ukrainian relations and South Africa as a BRICS member. So it said that in September, anyway, these two vessels were actually supposed to visit and to participate in Africa Aerospace and Defense 2024 exhibition. But that visit was also cancelled also at the last minute. So these strategic bombers were supposed to have visited during the last exhibition called Africa Aerospace and Defense 2024 exhibition, but it was also cancelled last minute. Now, in terms of a solidarity that seems to be contested by both Russia, by South Africa, especially towards either Russia or Ukraine, it says that Sibiha, who was the newly appointed Ukrainian foreign minister, appeared to have had a successful visit, though also not without running foul of internal GNU policies. And I watched that meeting between him and Ronald Lamola. It felt really cordial. There were really intelligent discussions, really intelligent analysis going back and forth. The foreign minister of South Africa and foreign minister of Ukraine, and it felt like a really successful visit. So according to this report here, it actually speaks about the culmination of that success. Then even became the fact that Leon Schreiber announced that he had signed an agreement with Sibiha to waive visas for diplomats from both countries with visiting each other. All right. So as a result of that meeting, as successful as it was, Home Affairs Minister then made an announcement saying that, there have been visa waivers now between diplomats of Ukraine and diplomats of South Africa visiting each other's countries. All right. And I think Schreiber really got a lot of heat during that period where it actually appeared that he was, running ahead of the government or ahead of the president in terms of the signing of this waiver. Now, this report then says that even according to Schreiber actually said that we continue, this is Schreiber speaking now, he says, we continue to see Ukraine as a valued ally and as a valued friend who supported us right from the beginning, from the days of our struggle against apartheid right through to now. So that's Leon Schreiber's argument, and sort of like a rebuttal, or sort of like probably a response to President Cyril Ramaphosa's, speech, also saying that Russia can be seen as a trusted ally and a trusted friend. So you see, he actually uses the same framing, so to speak, of President Cyril Ramaphosa's rhetoric when he described Russia as an ally. Here, Leon Schreiber is also arguing that they see Ukraine as a valued friend and also as a valued ally. All right. Now, the report then goes on to say that this was clearly a jibe. Exactly. It says that this was clearly a jibe at President Cyril Ramaphosa, who had said the same thing about Russia being a valued ally and also an ally, a friend, when he met President Vladimir Putin at the BRICS summit in Kazan, last week. President Ramaphosa spokesperson Vincent Magwenya then chimed in by saying that Ramaphosa had not yet authorized Schreiber to sign the document. All right. So Sibiha then implicitly made the same point that Ukraine had also been a long-time friend to South Africa when he unveiled a plaque at Pretoria's Freedom Park honoring the late Hennady Udovengo, a Ukrainian diplomat who had served as the vice chairperson of the United Nations Special Committee Against Apartheid from 1985 to 1992, when Ukraine was a part of the Soviet Union. Now, it says that both Russia and the ANC, and what's really interesting for me about all of this is the fact that, as at the time, during the fight for apartheid, here it says that, when Ukraine was still a part of the Soviet Union, Ukraine supported South Africa's fight against apartheid. But then the ANC comrades argue that the Soviet Union supported their fight against apartheid by providing weapons to kick out the proponents of apartheid from South Africa. So it's a really, for me, I don't know if you guys see the whole entanglement in the whole debate between where Ukraine stands, so to speak, in this whole divide. Ukraine, as at the time, was a part of the Soviet Union, all right? And then the Soviet Union helped the ANC comrades, especially in terms of, Julius Malema speaks about it a lot, in terms of support, in terms of weapons, to be able to kick out, the apartheid proponent from South Africa. But at this time, Ukraine was a part of the Soviet Union. Now, Ukraine is now independent from the Soviet Union, and then we have Russia and Ukraine being independent nations. But then each of them vying for allegiance for South Africa, to which when they were both together, both of them supported South Africa. So it's just a mess, completely a mess. But anyway, he speaks about how that both Russia and the ANC like to remind the world that Russia supported the liberation movement, but Ukraine also points out that it supported the liberation struggle as it was still then, exactly my point, and it was still then a part of the Soviet Union. It says that at the ceremony unveiling the plaque at Freedom Park, Becky Langer, a former South African ambassador to Russia and China and a brother of the late Chief Justice Pius Langer, recalled how he and many ANC members had studied in Ukraine. Sibiha, who noted that Monday was the 978th day of Russia's war against Ukraine, appealed through Ronald Lamola for South Africa to try to stop the war, including by using its influence on Moscow. It then says that South Africa's voice makes a real difference in Africa and globally, and we need your solidarity and support on matters crucial for all of us, which Sibiha says in the joint conference with Ronald Lamola. Now, it then says here that Ukraine urges South Africa action. Sibiha noted that South Africa will take over the presidency of the G20 in December. Especially, we're really waiting for that seriously, because by December, South Africa will lead the G20. And then he says that Ukraine foreign ambassador says, we place high expectations on your strong leadership in addressing regional and global challenges, including Russia's aggression against Ukraine. So for me, this is very problematic, because if South Africa will become the leader of G20 by December, what South Africa is going to be leading the G20? Is it got the government of national unity that has a divided opinion on this war in terms of whose solidarity it would ascribe to as a leader of the G20 or what? It's going to be a mess. I can already see it. He speaks about how Sibiha spokesperson Hillary Tuki then told Daily Maverick that Ukraine understood Ronald Lamola's response, that the focus of South Africa's G20 presidency would be on sustainable economic development and the need for justice in global financial governance. Okay? He then says that the minister then says that, but our view is that Russian aggression against Ukraine has global repercussions, including for the economy, for energy security, for food security, and many other areas. So you see that Ronald Lamola is actually, in his response to this foreign minister from Ukraine, seems to be speaking about how the focus of South Africa's G20 leadership wouldn't want to bother much on the war between Ukraine and Russia. All right, but then you see the Ukrainian minister still pulling him back into that divide, saying that you have to have a stand in this divide, especially when you will be leader of the G20. He then says that the war should be addressed in the G20. This is then the Ukrainian minister, speaking. He says that the war should be addressed in the G20, and then he then added that Lamola had told Sibiha that South Africa would find a way to focus on Ukraine and the war during his G20 presidency. Anyway, now this Tuki now, who then he then added, this is now him speaking to the Daily Maverick. He then added that Sibiha had also asked Ronald Lamola and other South African officials he met whether South Africa could persuade Brazilian President Inácio Lula da Silva to invite Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to this year's G20 summit in Brazil next month, where he would make a proposal on how to end the war in Ukraine. Tuki said Sibiha's request was well received and the South African officials but they made no commitment, all right? Tuki then said that Sibiha and Lamola had also discussed arrangements for Zelensky to visit South Africa. No specific dates were agreed on, but they discussed a certain time frame in the nearest future when this visit would take place. Sibiha then also said that the joint conference with Ronald Lamola, he said at that joint conference that Ukraine was planning a second peace summit after the first one in Switzerland in June, and said that, they will be needing South Africa to be there with his strong voice, all right? So this is actually why it felt really strange that just after he left, there were then these, vessels from Russia landing in South Africa. It says here that, Sibiha then invited South Africa to join the international coalition for the return of Ukrainian children, noting that Russia had stolen at least 20,000 Ukrainian children from the territories it had occupied and deported these children to Russia. Turkey said that Ronald Lamola's response was positive, and Ukraine understood that South Africa would participate in a conference of the coalition in Canada this week. So this is, for me now, this is actually, Sibiha then appealed. This is Ukraine now appealing to South Africa. Sibiha appealed to Lamola for South Africa to take a clear stance in restoring and protecting freedom of navigation in the Black Sea, saying that Russia was stepping up its attack on Ukrainian ports and agriculture to frustrate its effort to export grain and to destroy its economy. He said that, he had shared intelligence data with Ronald Lamola about Russia preparing to attack Ukraine's nuclear energy system and to leave the country without power during the coming winter. And so there goes, the meeting that was actually conducted between the Ukrainian foreign minister and Ronald Lamola, which puts South Africa in a really difficult place, you see, because now we see an ideological contradiction that, forces South Africa to take sides in a way that probably, I know Ronald Lamola anyway is actually astute in understanding ideological discrepancies. He speaks a lot about, radical economic transformation. He speaks a lot about communism. When you look at it, when you watch his previous videos, you see he's really astute in foreign affairs and also these ideological issues that actually govern the ideologies that have ruled the world. But then, it's now becoming clear why South Africa seems to be in a really confused place in terms of who it would support, between Russia and Ukraine in this war, in the fact that when Russia then was, which was actually said to have supported the ANC comrades at the time of the liberation wars against the apartheid government in South Africa, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, okay? And that whole Soviet Union supported South Africa's fight against apartheid. Now that these countries have actually, from 89, we saw the fall of the Iron Wall, we saw the fall of the Iron Curtain, so to speak, the Berlin Wall, and the introduction of glasnost and perestroika from 83 onwards, with the likes of the president in Russia at the time, who then pushed for a little bit of liberalism in Russia. We saw Ukraine and Russia then acting as independent forces, but then Putin now coming to the fore, trying to sort of like operate as a czar. I think Neil DBS speaks about that he doesn't see Putin as a president, but more like something like a czar that really wants that conglomeration of Soviet republics once more. So now we see that both of them operating as independent states, now in a war, have forced South Africa to now choose a stand. So when President Ramaphosa says that Russia is a trusted ally and a friend, Ukraine doesn't hear the same thing. Probably when Ukraine was a part of the Soviet Union, Ukraine might have heard the same rhetoric clearly in the way Putin is hearing it today. But now that they now operate as independent states, it's a little bit tricky to understand what President Ramaphosa says when he says Russia is an ally and a friend. And then the GNU partners, the likes of the DA, who actually see more allegiance with Ukraine, then see a different language altogether with that language. And for them, although they might be speaking to the fact that the Soviet Union helped South Africa get free from the apartheid struggles at the time, their allegiance more now is towards Ukraine now being an independent state, you see. And so it's just a really total mess. And I don't know how the GNU is going to escape this one. But anyway, I don't know. What do you guys think about this whole clash in the parliament and the analysis here? Share your thoughts in the comments.